June 4th, 1942, Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. As dawn broke over the calm waters of the Central Pacific, Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima climbed into the cockpit of his A6M20 fighter, confident that today's mission would be another demonstration of Japanese air superiority. What he couldn't possibly know was that within hours, his aircraft would become the most valuable intelligence prize of the Pacific War. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how a single damaged aircraft, against all odds, would completely transform American fighter tactics and technology, forever changing the course of aerial warfare in the Pacific. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 had established itself as the undisputed master of Pacific skies. With a kill ratio approaching 12-1 against American fighters in early engagements, the Zero had become a source of both terror and mystery to Allied pilots. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, commanding Fighting Squadron 3 aboard the USS Yorktown, had watched helplessly as his squadron's F-4F Wildcats were repeatedly outmaneuvered and shot down during early engagements. The Americans had no reliable information on the Zero's capabilities, only the grim statistics of their mounting losses and fragmentary reports from surviving pilots. "We're fighting an aircraft we know nothing about," Thatch told his pilots during a briefing aboard the Yorktown. "All we know is that it can outclimb, outturn, and outrun anything we have. But every aircraft has weaknesses. We just haven't found this one's yet." Flight Lieutenant James Schaffner, one of Thatch's most experienced pilots, nodded gravely. "The Japs are keeping these things more secret than their battle plans. Every Zero that's gone down has either been in deep water or completely destroyed. They're making sure we don't get our hands on one." In Tokyo, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service maintained strict protocols regarding the Zero. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had personally issued standing orders that no Zero was to be allowed to fall into enemy hands intact. Pilots were expected to destroy their aircraft if forced down in enemy territory, and recovery teams were dispatched whenever possible to secure wreckage. The Zero's extraordinary performance came from design choices that Japanese engineers knew would be deeply troubling to the Americans if discovered. Chief Engineer Jiro Horikoshi, the Zero's designer, had achieved the fighter's remarkable agility through significant trade-offs. "We sacrificed everything for performance," he explained to visiting military officials at the Mitsubishi factory in Nagoya. "The Zero carries no armor protection for the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and the airframe is constructed to absolute minimum weight tolerances. This gives us superior range and maneuverability, but makes the aircraft vulnerable to damage." These vulnerabilities remained theoretical to American pilots, who couldn't exploit weaknesses they didn't know existed. The U.S. Naval Intelligence Office had created an entire department dedicated to gathering information about the Zero, offering substantial rewards to any unit that could secure even fragments of the aircraft. But by mid-1942, they had yet to examine a single intact component. Lieutenant Minoru Suzuki of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Technical Division understood the importance of maintaining this advantage. "The Americans build their fighters like tanks," he noted in a technical assessment. "They emphasize pilot protection and durability. Our philosophy is fundamentally different. As long as they don't understand our design approach, they will continue to fight us incorrectly." This technological stalemate might have continued indefinitely if not for the events that unfolded during the Battle of Midway. Among the Japanese pilots participating in the June 4th strikes against Midway was Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga, a 19-year-old pilot from Fukuoka who had already accumulated 11 confirmed kills in combat over China and the Philippines. Koga flew with the second wave attacking Midway Island, piloting an A6M20 with the tail code AI-154. At 0930 hours, Koga's formation encountered unexpected resistance from Marine Corps Wildcat fighters scrambling from Midway's Eastern Island airfield. During the ensuing dogfight, Koga's Zero was struck by a single 50 caliber round from the guns of Lieutenant James Daniels. I got a solid burst into a Zero that was turning in front of me, Daniels later reported. He immediately broke off and headed north, trailing a thin stream of liquid. I couldn't pursue because 2 more bandits were on my tail. The bullet had punctured the Zero's oil tank. Koga, realizing his engine would soon seize without oil pressure, made a critical decision. Rather than ditching in the open ocean, where he would almost certainly perish, he set course for Akutan Island, an uninhabited volcanic island in the Aleutians, where the Japanese had established an emergency landing field. Captain Robert Brackett, commanding the coastal observation post on nearby Unalaska Island, spotted the damaged Zero through his binoculars. "Aircraft approaching from southwest appears to be damaged," he reported via field telephone. "Definitely Japanese. Zero fighter. Looks like he's going to attempt a landing on Akutan." What happened next would change the course of the air war. Koga, reaching Akutan, lowered his landing gear to set down on what appeared from the air to be a smooth field. In reality, the surface was a treacherous bog. As the Zero touched down, its wheels immediately dug into the soft tundra, causing the aircraft to flip violently onto its back. The impact killed Koga instantly, but left the aircraft largely intact, the first undamaged Zero to fall into American hands. For 3 weeks, the inverted Zero remained undiscovered on remote Akutan. Then on July 10th, a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina on routine patrol spotted the distinctive silhouette. Lieutenant William Thies radioed an urgent message to Dutch Harbor. "Have located undamaged enemy fighter on Akutan. Appears intact. Requesting immediate recovery team." The significance of the discovery was immediately apparent to naval intelligence. Within hours, a salvage team led by Lieutenant Robert Kermsey was dispatched to the site. What they found exceeded their wildest expectations. "The aircraft is in near-perfect condition," Kermsey reported. "The pilot was killed on impact, but the airframe suffered minimal damage in the crash. Engine appears recoverable. This is the intact Zero we've been hoping for." The recovery operation itself became a race against time and the elements. Chief Petty Officer James Devlin supervised the delicate process of extracting the Zero from the bog. "We had to work carefully," Devlin recalled. "The swampy ground made it difficult to bring in heavy equipment, and we were constantly worried about Japanese patrols spotting us. We essentially had to dismantle the aircraft where it lay, photographing everything before we moved it to ensure we could reassemble it correctly. Within a week, the components of AI-154 were carefully crated and loaded aboard the seaplane tender USS Casco for transport to the Naval Air Station at San Diego. Security was extraordinary, with armed guards posted around the clock and all personnel involved sworn to secrecy under threat of court-martial. Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders, a test pilot with over 200 flight hours, received unusual orders on July 23rd. "Report immediately to North Island. Special testing assignment. Top secret classification." He had no idea he was about to become the first American to fly a Zero. When Sanders arrived at the secure hangar at North Island Naval Air Station, he was stunned to find a fully restored Zero fighter. The aircraft had been hastily repaired, with American instruments replacing the Japanese ones and the Rising Sun insignia painted over with U.S. markings to prevent any trigger-happy American gunners from shooting it down during test flights. Technical Sergeant Paul Meyer led the restoration team. "We worked around the clock to get this thing flyable," he explained to Sanders. "Had to manufacture some parts ourselves, and the documentation is all in Japanese, which didn't help. but she's ready to go. We're calling her Kogas Zero, after the pilot. Sanders approached the aircraft with professional curiosity that quickly transformed into astonishment. "The construction is unlike anything I've seen in an American fighter," he noted in his test flight journal. "The airframe is incredibly light. I can actually flex the wing skin with hand pressure. There's no armor anywhere. No protection for the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. They've sacrificed everything for performance." His first flight in the Zero, conducted in highly restricted airspace with a protective screen of Wildcats, was a revelation. "The control response is phenomenal," Sanders recorded. "Lighter than any American fighter by a significant margin. It practically reads your thoughts. Turns so tightly that I'm limited more by my ability to withstand G-forces than by the aircraft's capabilities." Over the next 2 months, Sanders and a small team of test pilots put the Zero through an exhaustive series of flight tests, carefully measuring every aspect of its performance envelope. They compared it directly with the F-4F Wildcat, F-4U Corsair, and P-38 Lightning in simulated combat scenarios. The results were meticulously documented in a 150-page technical report that would become the foundation of American fighter tactics in the Pacific. At the Naval Air Station's Tactical Development Unit, Lieutenant Commander John Thatch received the preliminary test results with intense interest. Before Kogas Zero, Thatch had been working blind, developing defensive tactics based only on combat reports. His most successful innovation, the Thatch Weave, a defensive tactic where 2 fighters worked together to trap pursuing Zeros, had been created entirely through theory and desperate necessity. "These test results confirm what we suspected but couldn't prove," Thatch told the assembled fighter squadron commanders. "The Zero has phenomenal performance advantages in 3 key areas: climb rate, turning radius, and low-speed handling. But these come at a cost we can exploit." Commander William Gentner, who had also flown the captured Zero, elaborated, "It has no armor protection. A single well-placed .50 caliber round can ignite the entire aircraft. It can't dive at high speeds because the controls lock up and the wings risk structural failure above 350 knots. And its roll rate at high speed is abysmal." This information revolutionized American fighter tactics overnight. The previous doctrine, which had emphasized turning engagements, playing to the Zero's strengths, was completely reversed. New tactical directives emphasized boom and zoom approaches, high-speed diving attacks followed by climbing extensions that the Zero couldn't match. Captain Joseph Foss, who would later become one of the top American aces of the war, implemented these new tactics with his squadron of F-4F Wildcats on Guadalcanal. "Before Kogas Zero, we were trying to dogfight with them, which was suicide," he explained to his pilots. "Now we know better. We use our advantages, diving speed, roll rate, and durability, and refuse to fight on their terms." The impact was immediate and dramatic. Within 6 months of implementing the new tactics, the kill ratio between American fighters and Zeros had shifted from 12-1 in favor of the Japanese to nearly 1-1. By late 1943, with better American fighters entering service and tactical knowledge fully disseminated, the advantage had completely reversed. Meanwhile, the captured Zero had an equally profound effect on American aircraft design. At the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation in Bethpage, New York, engineers pored over the technical reports from the Zero tests as they finalized the design of the F-6F Hellcat, the intended replacement for the outclassed Wildcat. William Schwendler, Grumman's chief engineer, made critical adjustments to the Hellcat's design specifications based on the intelligence from Kogas Zero. "We're increasing the wing area to improve turning performance, upgrading the engine to provide better climb rates, but keeping our fundamental design philosophy of pilot protection and structural strength," he informed the Navy's procurement officers. The result was a fighter specifically engineered to counter the Zero. When the Hellcat entered combat in August 1943, its effect was devastating. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, described his first encounter with Zeros in the Hellcat. "It was like we'd been fighting with one arm tied behind our backs, and suddenly the restraints were gone. We could outclimb them, outdive them, and when necessary outfight them on their own terms." The Japanese, meanwhile, were slow to recognize the significance of the lost Zero. Naval Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander Takeo Iguchi had filed a report about Koga's missing aircraft, but with the chaotic retreat following the Midway defeat, little attention was paid to a single lost fighter. It wasn't until early 1943 when they began encountering American fighters employing radically different and far more effective tactics that Japanese commanders realized something fundamental had changed. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa reviewed combat reports showing the declining effectiveness of the Zero with growing alarm. The Americans appear to have developed specific countermeasures to the Zero's capabilities, he noted in a memo to the Naval General Staff. They now refuse to engage in turning battles and utilize high-speed slashing attacks that exploit our aircraft's weaknesses. This suggests they have acquired detailed knowledge of the Zero's performance envelope. By then, it was too late. The technical and tactical advantages that had made the Zero the terror of the Pacific had been thoroughly neutralized. What's more, the Japanese, wedded to their existing design and hampered by declining industrial capacity, were unable to develop a successor with the necessary improvements to regain their advantage. In a cruel irony for the Japanese, their own tactical doctrine had contributed to their undoing. The standing orders requiring pilots to destroy damaged aircraft had created a culture where pilots preferred to attempt emergency landings rather than ditch at sea. Exactly the choice that had led Koga to crash land on Akutan rather than ditching in the open ocean. The Americans, by contrast, had designed their aircraft with pilot survival as a priority, including self-sealing fuel tanks, armored cockpits, and robust ditching characteristics. This philosophy not only preserved experienced pilots, but paradoxically had also prevented the Japanese from capturing intact American aircraft to study. Lieutenant James Sargent, an intelligence officer assigned to the technical evaluation of Koga's Zero, noted this fundamental difference in approach. The Japanese built a fighter that would win battles at the cost of pilots. We built fighters that would bring pilots home. In the long run, our philosophy proved superior because experience is the one irreplaceable component in air combat. By early 1944, the Zero was obsolescent, outclassed by new American designs that had been specifically engineered to defeat it. Tadashi Nakajima, who had once confidently proclaimed the Zero would maintain air superiority throughout the war, found himself instructing new pilots who were being sent to combat with inadequate training in increasingly outdated aircraft. "We are asking these young men to fight in conditions where victory is nearly impossible," he confided to his diary in March 1944. "Our technical advantage, once so decisive, has completely evaporated. They face American pilots with better aircraft, better training, and specific tactical knowledge of our capabilities." The captured Zero continued to yield valuable intelligence throughout the war. In addition to the tactical and technical information it provided, it also underwent destructive testing to determine its vulnerability to various weapons. Engineers fired different calibers of ammunition at the airframe and components to identify critical weak points that could be targeted by American gunners. Technical Sergeant Walter Hill supervised these tests at the Naval Air Weapons Station at China Lake. "We discovered that the unprotected fuel system was extraordinarily vulnerable," Hill reported. A single tracer round penetrating any of the wing tanks would almost certainly ignite the fuel vapor. We also found that the Zero's pneumatic system, which powered the guns and landing gear, could be disabled by damage to exposed lines running along the interior of the fuselage. This information was incorporated into air combat training for all American fighter pilots. Gunnery instructors emphasized targeting the Zero's vulnerable areas, particularly the wing routes, where fuel tanks were located, to maximize the probability of catastrophic damage with minimal ammunition expenditure. The story of Koga's Zero came full circle in June 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, an engagement so one-sided that American pilots dubbed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. In 2 days of combat, American carrier-based fighters shot down over 400 Japanese aircraft while losing only 30 of their own. Lieutenant Alexander Vratsiu, flying a Hellcat from USS Lexington, shot down 6 Zero fighters in a single engagement. They were flying the same way they had in 1942, he later recalled, but we were fighting a completely different war. We knew exactly what they could and couldn't do, exactly where to hit them, and exactly how to exploit their weaknesses. It was almost unfair. Among the Japanese pilots lost in that battle was Lieutenant Yoshiyuki Tanaka, who had been Koga's wingman during the Midway operation 2 years earlier. In a letter found among his personal effects after his carrier was sunk, Tanaka had written, "Something changed after Midway. The Americans suddenly seemed to know all our secrets, all our tactics. It was as if they could read our flight manuals." The strategic impact of Koga's Zero extended far beyond tactical advantages. By neutralizing Japan's early air superiority, it accelerated the American advance across the Pacific by months, if not years. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, later estimated that the intelligence gained from the captured fighter had saved thousands of American lives and shortened the war significantly. After the war, during the technical intelligence debriefings conducted as part of the occupation, Japanese engineers were stunned to learn about Koga's intact Zero and its impact on American tactics and aircraft development. Jiro Horikoshi, the Zero's designer, reportedly said with resignation, "It was inevitable that they would eventually discover the Zero's weaknesses. All aircraft have them. But had they not captured Koga's fighter, it might have taken another year of combat losses to fully understand them." The captured Zero ultimately found its way to the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum, where it remains one of the most historically significant aircraft in the collection. Museum curator Robert Meiksch described it as possibly the most important enemy aircraft captured during World War II. Its impact on American fighter tactics and design was immediate and decisive. For Flight Petty Officer Koga, who died on impact in that remote Alaskan bog, there is a tragic irony. His final decision to attempt an emergency landing rather than ditch at sea not only cost him his life, but also handed his nation's enemies the key to defeating the aircraft he flew. Had he followed standing orders to destroy his damaged Zero, or simply ditched in the open ocean, the course of the air war in the Pacific might have been significantly different. In the decades following the war, the legacy of Koga's Zero has become a case study in military intelligence and technological adaptation. At the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, the incident is still taught as an example of how a single intelligence windfall can completely transform a theater of operations. Admiral James Holloway, who flew Hellcats in the Pacific and later served as Chief of Naval Operations, reflected on the significance of the captured Zero in his memoirs. There are few examples in military history where the acquisition of a single enemy weapon system has so dramatically altered the balance of power in a conflict. The captured Zero gave us the key to victory in the Pacific Air War. The young pilots who had once approached combat with the Zero with dread now found themselves in command of the skies. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, who received the Medal of Honor for single-handedly defending his carrier against a Japanese bombing attack early in the war, expressed the transformation succinctly. In 1942, meeting a zero was a nightmare. By 1944, it was an opportunity. For the Japanese naval leadership, the lesson came too late and at too high a cost. Admiral Matome Ugaki, who served as Chief of Staff to Admiral Yamamoto, wrote in his diary in late 1944, "Our initial advantage in fighter aircraft has been completely lost. The Americans have not only developed superior aircraft, but have learned to defeat the Zero with tactics specifically designed to exploit its weaknesses. Our pilots, once the masters of the Pacific skies, are now flying to nearly certain defeat." The final chapter in the story of Koga's Zero played out in the skies over Japan itself during the last months of the war. American B-29 bombers, once vulnerable to intercepting Zeros, now flew with escort fighters that easily dispatched the increasingly obsolete Japanese defenders. Many of these escorts were flown by pilots who had studied the performance data from Koga's Zero and trained specifically to counter its capabilities. Major Thomas Maguire, who became the second highest scoring American ace of the war with 38 victories, carried a card in his flight jacket pocket summarizing the Zero's performance limitations, information derived directly from the tests of Koga's captured fighter. "Know your enemy better than he knows himself," Maguire advised the pilots in his squadron. That knowledge is often the only difference between victory and defeat. In the final analysis, the story of Koga's Zero demonstrates how a single event, in this case, a damaged fighter making an emergency landing on a remote island, can change the course of a global conflict. It underscores the critical importance of technical intelligence in modern warfare and the often thin margin between victory and defeat. The Zero itself, once the symbol of Japanese air power, became emblematic of the limits of designing equipment for ideal conditions, rather than the harsh realities of protracted warfare. Its technical brilliance, optimized for the opening phase of the conflict, became a liability as the war evolved and expanded. The American approach of continuous improvement and adaptation, informed by the intelligence windfall of Koga's Zero, ultimately proved more suited to the demands of total war. For the pilots who fought and died in the Pacific Air War, the capture of Koga's Zero represented a crucial turning point. The moment when the mysteries of their most feared opponent were finally revealed and the path to victory became clear. What began as a desperate struggle against a superior and unknown enemy transformed into an increasingly one-sided contest as knowledge, industrial might, and tactical innovation combined to overcome what had once seemed an insurmountable advantage. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.